This tiny man is a camera. If you didn't have Action Man as a child, then you missed out playing with a whole plethora of plastic crap. Action Man was essentially G.I. Joe's extreme cousin, and in the 90s, he got up to all sorts of action-packed shenanigans, which meant that he came with a buttload of different get-ups. Top secret mission in the bathtub? Send in scuba Action Man. Your siblings' eyes looking a little bit empty? Call upon Blow Dart Action Man. Concerned about your extended warranty? Wait until you're reached by Call Center Action Man. I may have made that one up. This particular Action Man comes from the storyline where he needs to beat the evil Dr. X. And on this occasion, the only way that he can do that is by becoming a hip piece of shit and taking up film photography. No way, that can't be right. His mission is to take photos of this evil bastard robbing a bank or something. Not stop him, no, just take his portrait while he's doing it. While Mr. Man is jumping from rooftop to rooftop, he thought that the best tool for the job would be a massive, shoulder-mounted camera that must weigh at least 15 kilograms. Not say, I don't know, like a Canon point and shoot or something. That would have slipped way too easily into his tiny pockets. And while in 1969, James Bond was using sub-miniature cameras, 30 years later, in 1998, an Action Man is using equipment the size of a Shetland pony. And I don't know what photography school this guy went to, but he feels the need to leave on his almost blacked out shades every time he looks in the viewfinder. I got a feeling that Dr. X isn't the real lunatic here. Although Action Man is lugging around this left-handed monstrosity of a camera, the lens that actually takes the photo is embedded in this poor bugger's chest. And you're not going to believe this, but there is actually very little information online about the technical specifications of this camera. It's almost like this is a child's toy, and no one actually cares how this lens is designed. So with this in mind, let's just assume that its highly advanced lens elements are capable of focusing red, green and blue wavelengths at the same plane in order to virtually eliminate chromatic aberrations. And it produces images sharper than the human eye can register. Either that or it's made of plastic. It's hard to say really. Given its lack of dials and buttons, it's pretty safe to assume that this camera has no manual controls. Although I really feel like the manufacturer missed a trick not having a tiny little shutter knob hidden in his trousers somewhere. I'm guessing that it's fixed aperture, maybe f8 to f11 with a shutter speed of around 1/100th of a second. And really the only options you have with this camera are take the photo or don't take the photo. Essentially this thing is the same specs as a disposable camera, except, you know, in the shape of a man. Even though he is lugging around a camera just so stupidly big relative to his size, he actually only shoots 110 film. 110 film is roughly a quarter of the size of 35mm, so sharpness and detail aren't really its forte. To give this film its best possible chances, you really want to pair it with a nice sharp lens and not send it through, say, a plastic man like I am. But if you're a fan of heavy grain and being disappointed, then I think you're in for a treat. Luckily, or actually unluckily as well, depends how you feel about 110, you can still get your hands on fresh cartridges of this film thanks to the guys over at Lomography. And to load this camera, you remove the back of Action Man's vest and replace his spine with film, which is kind of a terrifying thought really. There's a small window on the back so you can see how many terrible photos you've taken, and a small wheel to advance the frames. And it's one of those good old crappy feeling clicky winders that go hand in hand with cheapo cameras. The viewfinder on this camera is a lot like me in the sense that it's pretty simple. It doesn't really have one. To compose your images, you use this sort of sports finder that sits on the little camera. The little camera that the little man is holding, but that's not the actual camera because the little man is the camera. And it's not a particularly great viewfinder either because it sits a massive 4 inches away from the lens. And 4 inches is a lot. Don't you let anyone tell you otherwise. So I own 3 of these cameras, which is probably 3 more than anyone should own. The first one I bought off eBay the instant I remembered that this thing existed, and the other 2 I found in my parents' loft in a box of various Action Men left over from my childhood. We had to have 2 because apparently me and my brother can't share anything. And when I found it, it dawned on me that this was probably my first ever camera. The camera that sent me on this long, disappointing path of photography and video production. And just when I'd gotten over that mind-blowing revelation, I found this. This is an original roll of Action Man film that came with the camera, shot and undeveloped. So that means that these are quite possibly the first photos I ever took in my life. I had really high hopes of getting these developed, fantasizing about getting back perfectly composed shots, so beautiful that they bring a tear to your eye and showcase that I was some sort of photography prodigy in the making. But as you can imagine, 25 years in a loft had not been kind and had sucked the life out of this film. Either that or I just had my finger over every single shot. That is a very real possibility. Right, I'm going to stop us there and take a quick minute to talk about this week's sponsor. Have you heard of this thing called music? Well, it's quite good. And if you want some for your projects, then now you can with Audio. Audio is a music and sound effects licensing platform with thousands of tracks, so you'll find just the right song or sound you need for your next project. I used Audio for all the tracks and sound effects in this video, and I found some absolute bangers by some very talented artists. Now, we all know that AI will eventually take over the world and put us all in a human zoo, but until then, you can use AI to your advantage with Audio's new feature, Link Match AI. If you found a song that you like on SoundCloud, YouTube, TikTok, etc., you can copy and paste the link, drop it into Link Match AI, and Audio will search its entire library to find a song that sounds similar, saving you a whole bunch of time. Audio are offering 70% off their Pro subscription for the first year, giving you unlimited music downloads, sound effects downloads, Link Match AI searches, stems, and all you need to do to get this is click the link in the description below and use the code GRAINDEAD. Now back to the tiny plastic man. So I've got some fresh rolls of 110 film that I want to insert into this guy's backside and see if I can try and use this thing to create some serious, portfolio-worthy work. I don't like my odds, but even one will do. Here's a sentence you've never heard anyone say about a camera. His trousers kept falling off. His little white slacks were proving quite the inconvenience when trying to get hold of this guy. Obviously, I could have just whipped him off, but there is something just so deeply disturbing about taking him out in his little plastic Y-fronts. What the f*** is this video? In fact, trying to get something that resembles a good grip on this camera is harder than this guy's hair. Naturally, your finger just wants to sit right in front of the lens, like some sort of greasy, meaty lens cap. Although that could just be me subconsciously trying to sabotage myself. Speaking of which, I was really hoping that the manufacturers had designed this in such a way that Action Man's own limbs would sneak into the frame and ruin a shot. And they did not disappoint, because would you believe it? This is a tiny plastic boot sticking out the bottom of the frame. I think this might just be my favourite thing about this camera. Another thing that makes this camera kind of tricky to use is the fact that it is a child's toy and I am a grown man. Yeah, I know it shouldn't matter what your camera looks like and it's just a tool for capturing images. God, I sound like one of those people who don't have a Leica. But I feel like this could quite possibly be the exception. It does draw a certain amount of attention from the people around you. And depending whether you care or not that people around you might assume you have the mind of a child trapped inside an adult's body, it might distract you from focusing on your photography process if every time you bring it up to your face, you feel ashamed of having your hands wrapped around the muscular thighs of a tiny plastic man. Apart from being as ergonomic as a buttered watermelon, it's the technical specifications that really hold this camera back. At this fixed aperture and shutter speed, some of these photos didn't stand a chance of coming out. And even if you were able to change to some slower shutter speeds to get more light on the film, there's no tripod mount on this little fella. I can think of a place where one could logically go, but to be honest, that's not going to be very comfortable for this little dude. Overall, I don't actually think that the quality of these photos is that bad. I mean, considering it's on the back foot already being shot on 110, and that combined with the fact that this thing's sole purpose was actually to part parents with their hard-earned cash to stop their child from screaming and not actually produce a nice image. But having said that, some of these are way better than I expected. I thought all these photos were going to be burning white-hot trash, but as it turns out, they're just sort of room temperature trash. You know, I would even go as far to say that I kind of, even sort of, like this one, sort of. Another surprising downside to this camera is just what an utter ball ache he is to carry. There's no camera strap lugs, unless you happen to have a tiny Action Man harness to tie him to, but let's face it, who's got one of them? I do. I have one of them. Why do I still have one of them? And he's just awkward to carry around in a camera bag unless you contort him into some uncomfortable position. To be honest, this can sometimes be an upside because I did chuckle when every time I tried to fit him in my camera bag, his teeny tiny little plastic booties would stick out from the zipper. Also, when using this guy, I couldn't help but feel I just wasn't doing him justice. Here's a guy whose day job is fighting terrorism while rock climbing or skiing down some lava and just generally being extremely extreme. And here I am, taking him on quaint river walks, capturing landscapes, photos of people sat quietly eating their lunch, and cats sat on riverboats. To be fair though, I did get this photo of this cow doing just one of the most massive wheeze known to all mankind, and I guess really, it doesn't get much more extreme than that. This photo is a great example of the viewfinder just generally being a bit crap with this camera. This is a boat called Borat that was spotted by my wife. Good God. I feel like I composed this shot very differently when I took it, but when I actually got the scan back, it turned out actually nothing like I thought it would. This could have just been a one-off though, and me for some reason at a funny angle, because all the others came out pretty much fine. Fine in the sense that they're almost how I remembered composing them. Not that they're good photos, definitely not. Overall, this may be the worst camera I have ever used. But really, I was asking quite a lot, and have to remember that this thing is an action figure with a gimmick and not serious photographic equipment. But one thing I will give it credit for is inspiring hundreds, maybe thousands of kids back in the 90s to go out and take some photos. Maybe it inspired many of the photographers that are working today. And for this, Action Man, we salute you. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to check out audio, click the link in the description below and use the code GrainDead for 70% off. Bloody Action Man.